There's a moment in season 16 that most people watched and moved on from. Kody Brown, sitting in that familiar confessional chair, calm as ever, says, and I am quoting him directly, "I am not responsible for Christine's emotional state." He said it with conviction. He said it like it was reasonable. He said it like a man who had fully convinced himself that the pain happening inside his own home had absolutely nothing to do with him. But here is what the camera captured in the same episode just minutes later. Christine Brown, sitting in her kitchen, breaking down. Tears she clearly tried to hold back. And just a few feet away, barely in the frame, almost like the editors didn't notice, a little girl, watching, still quiet. That little girl was truly Brown, and this is her story. If this kind of deep dive is what you come here for, hit that like button right now and subscribe to SisterWives Crew. We go where other channels don't. And trust me, you do not want to miss where this one is going. Now, let's go back to the beginning, because to understand what Truly witnessed, you have to understand what Christine was before the camera started catching her at her worst. If you watched the early seasons of Sister Wives, and I mean really watched, not just had it on in the background, you remember a completely different Christine Brown. Seasons 2 and 3, she was the one making you laugh. She was loud in the best way, chaotic in a lovable way. She was the wife who made this whole unconventional family structure look like it might actually be joyful. She had this energy that was almost contagious through the screen. You believed her when she smiled. You believed the life she was living, because she seemed to believe it too. Truly was born into that version of her mother. Think about that. In the first years of Truly's life, Christine was still that woman, still laughing, still performing for the cameras with genuine warmth, rather than exhausted obligation. That is the mother Truly deserved to grow up with. That is the version of Christine Brown that should have been Truly's foundation. And what happened instead? What slowly, season by season, got stripped away is one of the most quietly devastating things this show ever documented. Not in the dramatic, shouting, table-flipping way reality television usually delivers its damage. Quietly, slowly, the way real damage always works. Because here is something that casual viewers of this show consistently missed, and I want to make sure we actually talk about it. If you go back and watch seasons 14 and 15 with fresh eyes, not looking at Christine, not looking at Kody, but watching the background, you will notice something about Truly that is difficult to unsee once you've seen it. There are multiple moments across those seasons where Truly appears in the background during emotionally charged conversations. And what is striking is not that she's there. Kids wander into rooms. That's normal. What is striking is how still she is, how watchful. There is a quality to how she observes that doesn't read like a distracted child who wandered in for a snack. It reads like a child who has learned to pay very close attention to the emotional temperature of a room. Child development research has a term for this: hypervigilance. It develops in children who grow up in environments of chronic emotional instability, not necessarily abuse, not necessarily any single dramatic event, but the steady, unrelenting background noise of adult distress. Children in these environments become extraordinarily skilled at reading facial expressions, body language, tone of voice. They learn to predict emotional shifts before they happen. They learn to manage themselves around the feelings of the adults in the room. And they do all of this because on some level, they have learned that the emotional state of the adults around them directly affects their safety. Not physical safety necessarily, but the kind of safety that matters most to a child. Emotional safety. The security of knowing that the people who love you are okay. Truly, Brown was learning to read a room before she learned to read a book. And I want to be very precise about what I mean when I say that, because this is not hyperbole for the sake of a dramatic video. This is what the research tells us happens to children in exactly the situation Truly was living inside. That is not childhood. That is something else entirely. That is a little girl doing emotional labor she had no business doing. Now let's talk about Kody. Because the way the show framed what was happening to Christine during this period is something that deserves to be challenged directly. TLC and the producers leaned into the narrative that Christine and Kody had a communication problem, that they were two people who simply couldn't get on the same page, that it was mutual, that it was an unfortunate but essentially symmetrical two adults failing to connect. And that framing was doing a tremendous amount of work to obscure what was actually happening. Watch the footage again. Not the confessionals where everyone gets to present their most composed, most articulate version of events. Watch the actual interactions. Watch how Kody responds in real time when Christine expresses pain. Watch the expression on his face. Watch the body language. Watch what he does immediately after she says something vulnerable. What you will see, consistently, across season after season, is not a man struggling to communicate. What you will see is a man who has made a quiet, firm, seemingly permanent decision that Christine's emotional reality is not something he is willing to engage with. It's dismissal. Systematic, repeated, almost clinical dismissal. He continued to appear on camera as the measured patriarch. He continued to deliver monologues about the complexity of plural marriage, about spiritual commitment, about the challenges of managing a large family. He got to be thoughtful, nuanced, and misunderstood. Christine got to be unstable. Christine got to be difficult. Christine got to be the communication problem. And truly, sitting in that house, watching all of it, internalizing all of it, got a front row seat to something no child should ever have to witness. Not just a mother in pain, but a mother in pain being told over and over that her pain was her own fault. The move to Flagstaff in season 15 is where I think the story shifts from sad to genuinely serious. And I want to spend some real time here, because I don't think this chapter gets the weight it deserves. Christine did not struggle with the Flagstaff move because she was resistant to change, or because she was being dramatic. She struggled because that move destroyed her entire support structure in one blow. Her community, her friendships, her familiarity, the city she had built a life in, gone. And she had no say. The decision was made, the family moved, and Christine was expected to adjust. Kody's response to her inability to adjust immediately was not patience. It was not compassion. It was not the behavior of a man who understood that his wife had just lost everything she had built outside of her marriage. His response was to blame. She wasn't trying hard enough. She wasn't committed enough. She was choosing to be unhappy. This is documented. This is on camera. He said these things out loud. Now, here is the number I want you to sit with. During the Flagstaff move and the years immediately following it, Kody Brown was approximately 6 to 7 years old. 6 to 7 years old. Do you know what child psychologists identify as the critical window for father-daughter attachment? It is exactly this age range. Ages 5 through 8 are when a daughter's relationship with her father sets foundational patterns for how she understands her own worth, for what she expects from the people who are supposed to love her, for what she believes relationships look like. This is the window. And during this window, Kody Brown was emotionally absent from Truly's life in every meaningful sense. He was in the house sometimes, he was on camera, but present? In the way that a father of a 6-year-old girl needs to be present? The footage does not support that. Christine was drowning, and Kody was looking the other way, and Truly had nobody standing between her and all of it. The move to Flagstaff didn't just uproot Christine Brown. It uprooted a 6-year-old girl who had no idea that the family she had always known was already, quietly, completely over. And now I want to get to something that I genuinely believe is the most underreported aspect of this entire story. Because there is a pattern in family psychology research, specifically in research about families with one emotionally absent parent and one visibly struggling parent. And that pattern is this. The youngest child in the family, almost always with striking consistency, becomes the emotional anchor for the parent who is suffering. Not the oldest, not the middle children, the youngest. There are several reasons researchers believe this happens, but what matters for our purposes is the result. The youngest child ends up in a role that has a clinical name. It's called Parentification, and it means exactly what it sounds like, a child who is functionally parenting their parents, meeting emotional needs that should never be a child's responsibility to meet. Now, I am not going to speculate beyond what Christine herself has said publicly, but Christine has said, in interviews after the show, that Truly gave her a reason to fight. She has said it more than once. She has said it with obvious love and obvious sincerity, and I believe her completely. And I also need to say this clearly. That sentence is one of the most heartbreaking things in this entire story. Not because Christine said something wrong, she said something honest. But a child should not be a parent's lifeline. A child should not be the reason a grown woman finds the strength to get out of bed. That is a love that asks too much. That is weight that a little girl should never, ever have been handed. And the reason Truly was handed that weight goes back to the man in the confessional chair who declared himself not responsible for Christine's emotional state. Kody Brown didn't just fail Christine. He failed Truly, and the mechanism of that failure is worth naming precisely. He used the framework of his faith, celestial marriage, divine order, spiritual hierarchy, to provide theological cover for emotional neglect. When Christine needed accountability, she got doctrine. When she needed presence, she got a husband reminding her of her commitments. When she needed her partner to look at her and say, "I see that you are suffering, and I am going to show up for you," she got told that her suffering was a reflection of her spiritual alignment. And a little girl watched all of it, absorbed all of it, learn all of it, the way children learn everything, not from what they're taught, but from what they witness. Kody Brown didn't just fail Christine. He used God as his alibi. And Truly Brown was in the room for the whole thing. Here's something I want to give proper credit to, because it matters and because this community deserves to hear it said out loud. The SisterWives audience, and specifically the people who have been in the Reddit threads, the forums, the comment sections for years, they saw this before anyone else named it. Long before the divorce was confirmed. Long before Christine sat down and gave her first post-show interview. Long before any of the behind-the-scenes details started coming out. There were fans cataloging what they called the Truly pattern. Time-stamped moments across multiple seasons. Screenshots, frame-by-frame observations of a child's face during adult conversations she should never have been present for. Body language analyses that honestly put some psychology graduates to shame. These were regular people watching a reality show, and they were tracking something that the production team was either missing entirely or actively choosing to edit around. They flagged Truly's unusual stillness during emotionally loaded scenes. They flagged the way she positioned herself physically close to Christine in moments of tension. The way young children instinctively move toward the parent they sense needs protecting, which is itself a reversal of the natural order, because children are supposed to move toward parents for their own protection, not the other way around. They flagged moments where Truly's facial expressions carried a weight that felt completely inconsistent with the lightness you expect from a child that age. And they were right about all of it. Every single observation held up. The comment section was smarter than the production team. The audience was more honest than the edit. And that matters, because it means this was never invisible. It was always there. People just had to be willing to look directly at it instead of looking past it. Now, I want to talk about what happened to Christine after she finally left, because the Christine Brown of 2022 onward is genuinely one of the most remarkable character evolutions this show has ever produced. And it is not a coincidence that the transformation tracks almost exactly with the moment she stopped living inside the dynamic we just spent the last several minutes describing. She came back. The laugh came back. The energy came back. The woman who could walk into a room and make you feel like everything was going to be okay, she came back. And watching that recovery, as genuinely wonderful as it is, also tells you everything you need to know about what was keeping her down. You do not recover that fully, that visibly, from something that was just a communication problem. You do not transform that completely from a simple case of two people who couldn't get on the same page. The scale of Christine's recovery is a direct measurement of the scale of what she was surviving, and Truly watched the whole decline, and Truly is now watching the recovery. And if you think about what that arc looks like from the perspective of a child who lived through both ends of it, the implications are significant. Because here is what Truly Brown is growing up knowing, in her bones, in a way that no amount of therapy fully untangles. She knows what her mother looked like when she was being slowly diminished by someone who was supposed to love her. She has that in her memory. She carries that. And she also knows what her mother looked like when she finally chose herself. She has that too. The question, and this is the question I keep coming back to, is what Truly does with both of those things as she gets older. Because that knowledge, that full, unedited picture of what happened to her family, is going to demand to be processed eventually. That is simply how human beings work. Look at the other Brown children who went through the family collapse. Look at Paedon Brown. Whatever your feelings are about how he has handled things publicly, there is no questioning that Paedon has been the most unfiltered, least managed voice from inside the Brown family story. He said things on camera and in interviews that nobody else in that family had the nerve to say. He named things. He was willing to be uncomfortable, and the reason Paedon became that voice is not random. It connects directly to what he witnessed, and what he processed, and eventually what he couldn't keep contained anymore. Then look at Leon Brown. Completely different approach. Private, boundaried, deliberate, but equally honest in their own way. Leon drew a clean, firm line with Kody, and has maintained it without drama or performance. Just clarity. That clarity came from somewhere. It came from having seen things clearly for a long time, and eventually deciding to trust what they saw. Every Brown child who lived through the worst of this family's implosion has found their own way to reckon with it. Each one is different. Each one shaped by exactly what they personally witnessed and what they personally survived. And truly, who was younger than all of them during the worst of it, who had fewer defenses, whose attachment window was open during the years of maximum dysfunction, who was almost certainly carrying emotional weight that belonged to the adults around her, truly has not had her reckoning yet. She is still young. She is still becoming whoever she is going to be. But based on every pattern we have watched play out in this family, and based on everything we know about how children process prolonged exposure to exactly this kind of dynamic, that reckoning is not a question of if. It is a question of when, and what form it takes. And my honest prediction, and I want to be clear that this is my read based on everything we've discussed, not a statement of fact, is that when Truly Brown eventually speaks about her childhood in her own voice, it will be the most raw, most unguarded, most genuinely difficult thing any Brown family member has ever put into words. Not because Truly is destined for drama, not because she's going to perform pain for an audience, but because she has the most complete picture. She has the receipts, as they say, and she lived inside them. She saw Christine before and after. She experienced Kody's absence during the years that mattered most for her own development. She knows what the family looked like from the inside, at the youngest and most vulnerable vantage point, and she was not shielded from any of it. The older children had each other. They had their memories of a more functional time. They had more years of distance from it by the time they processed it as adults. Truly had Christine. And Christine at the time was barely keeping herself afloat. So what does all of this mean? What is the actual takeaway from everything we've laid out today? Because I want to be careful here. This is not about condemning Kody Brown for the 100th time in a way that just feels satisfying and then we all move on. That is easy. That is what 100 other channels are doing. This is about something more specific and more important than that. This is about the thing that reality television almost never shows you and almost never makes you sit with. The cost of adult dysfunction is not paid entirely by the adults. It gets distributed. It moves through households like the weather. It gets absorbed by whoever is smallest, whoever has the fewest defenses, whoever is at the age where they are most porous to the world around them. Kody Brown's refusal to take responsibility for Christine's emotional state did not stay confined to Kody and Christine. It traveled. It landed somewhere. And the evidence of where it landed is in the background of your screen, in shots the editors probably didn't even flag in the editing room. A little girl, very still, watching everything. The thing about parentification, the thing that makes it so difficult to untangle later in life, is that it doesn't feel like damage when you're inside it. It feels like love. It feels like it is needed. It feels like maturity even. The child who has learned to be the emotional anchor for a struggling parent often experiences a sense of purpose and closeness that is genuinely real. The love is real. The bond Christine and Truly clearly have is not diminished by any of this analysis. It is obvious, and it is beautiful, and it is one of the genuine goods that came out of an otherwise painful period. But the weight that was attached to that love? The part where a little girl's sense of safety and stability was organized around managing, or at minimum witnessing, her mother's emotional survival, that part has a cost. And that cost shows up later. It shows up in how you relate to people who are in pain. It shows up in how much of yourself you're willing to give before you recognize that you're giving too much. It shows up in what you believe love is supposed to feel like, what you believe being needed means, what you believe your own needs are allowed to be. All of that gets shaped in those early years. All of that is being shaped right now, in real time for Truly Brown. And here's what I find myself thinking about most when I sit with this whole story. Christine made it out. Christine is on the other side. She is genuinely happy in a way that is not performance. You can tell the difference by now. After all these seasons, you know what Christine performing happiness looked like, and you know what it looks like when it is real. She made it, and truly got to see that. Whatever else she carries from those years, she also carries the knowledge that her mother chose herself, that her mother found the exit, that her mother rebuilt. There is something in that, some counter-narrative to the years of watching the slow deterioration that matters enormously for a child trying to make sense of what family can look like and what a woman is allowed to want for herself. Christine, by leaving, by recovering, by becoming visibly herself again, gave truly a different kind of lesson. Not just the one about what it looks like when someone disappears into a bad dynamic, but the one about what it looks like when someone refuses to stay there. That is not a small thing. That might be the most important thing. And now I want to bring this full circle back to that season 16 confessional. Kody Brown saying, "I am not responsible for Christine's emotional state." I want to offer one final thought about that sentence. Not the one about Christine, but the one about truly. Because if Kody is not responsible for Christine's emotional state, his logic would presumably extend further. He is not responsible for what truly absorbed in those years. He is not responsible for the hypervigilance she developed. He is not responsible for the weight she carried. He is not responsible for the developmental window he was absent from during the most critical years of his youngest daughter's life. None of it is his responsibility. He has constructed a worldview in which his choices have no downstream consequences for the people inside his own household, and he has defended that worldview on camera with conviction for over a decade. But here's the thing about consequences. They do not require acknowledgement to exist. A man can spend the rest of his life believing he owes no one an accounting, and the accounting still happens. It just happens in the lives of the people he affected. It happens in therapy offices and in late-night conversations and in the patterns people notice in themselves years later and have to trace back to their origin. It happens in children who grew up too alert, too attuned, too ready to take care of everyone around them before they thought about themselves. The accounting always happens. Kody Brown just doesn't have to be in the room for it. Every other Brown child has already had their version of that reckoning. Paedon spoke. Leon set boundaries. The older children processed the collapse of this family in their own ways and at their own pace. Truly's moment is still ahead of her, and based on everything the age she was, what she witnessed, the role she appears to have occupied in Christine's survival, the absence of a father during the years that absence costs the most when that moment comes, it will not be quiet. It will not be managed. It will not be the kind of thing a carefully crafted family edit can smooth over. When Truly Brown has her reckoning with her own childhood, it will be the most honest thing this family has ever produced. And Kody Brown, sitting wherever he is when that day comes, will have no alibi left. Not celestial marriage, not communication breakdowns, not Christine's emotional state being Christine's problem. None of it will hold up against the testimony of the little girl who was standing in the corner watching the whole time. That day is coming, and when it does, it will rewrite everything Kody Brown has tried to build as his legacy. Now, I want to hear from you directly, and I mean this. I read every single comment on this channel. If you grew up in a house where one parent was in pain and the other one looked away, if you know what it feels like to be the child who watched and absorbed and carried weight that was never yours to carry, drop a heart in the comments. You don't have to explain it. Just let me know you're here and that this landed. And if you think Kody Brown will ever genuinely reckon with what the years of this family cost, truly, specifically, not Christine, not the marriage, not his public image, truly, his youngest daughter, tell me your honest take. I want to know if you think that kind of accountability is even possible for someone who spent this long convincing himself he wasn't responsible for any of it. Subscribe to SisterWives Crew if you are not already here, because the next video is going somewhere that I have been building toward for a while now, and it involves footage from season 13 that I believe completely reframes the timeline of when this family actually broke. Not when it looked like it broke on camera, but when the real fracture happened underneath the production. The date is earlier than you think. The evidence is in the footage, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. I will see you in the next one.